A Franco-British mission will be sent to Ukraine to work on strengthening the Ukrainian armed forces. This was announced by the French President Emmanuel Macron at a press conference following the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing in Paris on Thursday.
The first message is clear. It's that we will continue to support the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian army in the short term. This is a necessity to be in the best possible condition to prepare for peace. We also decided unanimously that this is not the time to lift whatever sanction, and it will not be a lifting of sanctions before peace is clearly established. And so we plan to continue the economic pressure, especially on the shadow fleet and on some industrial capacities. We will remain mobilized on these points.
Macron also added that Paris, along with London, are continuing efforts to deploy reassurance forces in Ukraine after a peace deal is reached. However, Macron says that not all European countries support this peacekeeping initiative.
The common ground and position of the Greek government is that the strongest security guarantee for Ukraine is the strengthening of the armed forces of Ukraine itself. And I believe that all the countries that participated in today's conference agreed in this direction.
Greece is among the countries that are not ready to send its troops to Ukraine, added its prime minister. At the same time, he underlined that it's important to reach a ceasefire as soon as possible, adding that all pressure must be exerted on Russia for Moscow to stop its attacks against Ukraine, especially on civilian infrastructure.
We had a very good meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. The Coalition of the Willing has gotten bigger, stronger, and very determined.
The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz stressed that until peace is reached, there is no sense in ending sanctions against Russia.
What is also important to us is that stopping sanctions at this time would be a serious mistake. The sanctions must be continued. They will also have to be developed further, and Europe and the US must take a clear stand together so that we can continue to use this opportunity to support Ukraine. It makes no sense to end the sanctions until peace has actually been achieved. And unfortunately, we are still a long way from that, as you can see.
The summit in Paris gathered high-ranking officials from 31 countries, as well as the President of the European Council, President of the European Commission, and NATO Secretary General.
We've agreed that we must go further now to support the peace process, support Ukraine, and increase the pressure on Russia to get serious. That means, first, stepping up the military pressure, so the Defense Secretary will chair the next Ukraine Defense Contact Group on the 11th of April. Second, it means increasing the economic pressure on Russia, accelerating new, tougher sanctions, bearing down on Russia's energy revenues, and working together to make this pressure count.
President Zelensky underlined that sanctions of any kind should not be lifted until Russia stops the war.
No lifting of any kind of sanctions until Russia will stop this war. And I think more pressure on it, more packages of sanctions. This is important. The second point, as you said, Kir, that new packages to strengthen Ukraine. And we heard of some of leaders' new packages. We are very thankful to all the leaders.
The Ukrainian Defense Intelligence opened the first military mosque for Muslim servicemen, announced the DIU Telegram post on Thursday. The new mosque has everything necessary for services, including the Quran in the Ukrainian and Arabic languages. Head of the Ukrainian Defense Intelligence, Kyrylo Budanov, oversaw the opening ceremony, thanking his Muslim brothers in arms for their unwavering courage in repelling the Russian invasion. Sweden has unveiled its largest rearmament plan since the Cold War. Stockholm announced on Wednesday it aims to increase defense spending to 3.5% of their GDP by 2030 and pledged to almost double the support for Ukraine. The statement came during a press conference led by the Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, who noted that the nation's defense budget already exceeds NATO's 2% benchmark, but emphasized that more investment is necessary.
Our goal is to push for an increase in this benchmark at the NATO summit in The Hague. We're doing our part.
Russia is preparing for a new spring offensive, stated President Zelensky in an interview with Le Figaro. According to him, Moscow is concentrating its forces on an attack, particularly targeting the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. Zelensky said that the Kremlin leader Putin is trying to buy time, adding that Ukraine is aware of preparations for this operation and is sharing intelligence with its allies. Russia had intended to launch this offensive 8 months ago, but Ukrainian forces ruined these plans with the Kursk operation, added Zelensky. During negotiations in Riyadh, the Russian team refused to discuss halting strikes against civilian objects, reported the deputy head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Igor Zhovkva. In an interview with Ukrinform Media, he stated that during talks in Saudi Arabia, Ukrainian and US representatives discussed the issue of civilian infrastructure, including residential buildings, schools and kindergartens. However, Zhovkva stated that intel gathered from the American side is that the Russians are refusing to talk about this, with Moscow telling Washington they did not have a mandate for the issue. US Presidential Special Envoy for Ukraine Keith Kellogg said that Russia has no plans to leave the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. However, legally, they are not part of the Russian Federation. In an interview with Fox News, Kellogg noted that in any resolution of the war, it is crucial to distinguish between actual and legal control.
When you look at the north with Luhansk, and then you've got Donetsk, which was just south of that, and Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. And only 3 of the 4 of those are fully occupied with the Russians. The Russians fully control Luhansk, but they don't the others. So the question is now, what does this look like? What does the territorial gains look like? And then you have to go back to what we call either de facto or de jure. De facto meaning, okay, you physically occupy the territory, they're not going to move off it. But you don't go to de jure and say, you've totally annexed it, we give it to you as a part of Russia.
Meanwhile, on Sunday, the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade reported the liberation of the village of Nadia in the Lugansk region. The brigade stated that the operation cost the Kremlin 2 months and 2 motorized infantry regiments, both of which were wiped out. Ukraine will propose a blueprint for a foreign military contingent in 7 to 10 days, announced President Zelensky on Thursday after the Coalition of the Willing meeting. Zelensky noted that many leaders had their own vision on how to ensure Ukraine's security in the event of a peace agreement with Russia. However, the basic vision is to ensure it is through a strong Ukrainian army and the deployment of a contingent of individual states.
There is a basis grounded on the Ukrainian army and on the contingent that is represented in Ukraine, in the sky, at sea, on land. We believe that Ukraine will propose a blueprint for dialogue, and I think it will happen in the next 7 to 10 days with the meeting that President Macron already announced. We will be very friendly, but we'll argue on the platform that will be prepared. We will propose a basic idea, a basic strategy.
The Ukrainian president added that some allies had ideas about deploying forces under the leadership of the OSCE or the UN, but Ukraine does not support these proposals. Russian forces launched a massive UAV strike on the city of Poltava, damaging civilian and energy infrastructure in the early hours of March 28. The deputy head of the Poltava Regional Military Administration, Volodymyr Kohut, stated that some drones were intercepted, but debris caused additional destruction. Kohut posted on Telegram that there were no casualties, adding that a fire covering 2,500 square meters had been fully extinguished. In response to the attack, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine stated that Russian aggressors are lying about aspirations for peace and continue to attack and endanger the civilian population. Meanwhile, Russian drones also targeted the southern Ukrainian port city of Odesa, reported Ukraine's State Emergency Service on Friday. One civilian was injured, while private homes, outbuildings and garages were damaged during the attack. Emergency crews deployed 5 firefighting units and support from the National Guard to extinguish the fires. Ukraine's air defense forces shot down a Russian Kub-BLA attack drone along the front line on Thursday. This marks the first confirmed destruction of this drone in combat. The Kub-BLA is a loitering munition with a 3-kilogram warhead designed to detonate upon impact. With an autonomous flight time of up to 30 minutes, it can reach speeds of 130 kilometers per hour. Military officials have stated that the adaptability and variety of Ukrainian FPV systems that intercept Russian drones provide a key advantage in countering evolving UAV threats. The European Union, together with Sweden and Germany, announced a €44 million funding initiative to support civil society organizations in Ukraine on March 27. This financial support aligns with the EU's broader strategy to reinforce civil society in Ukraine. Among other things, the support packages will focus on accountability for war crimes, gender equality, strengthening democratic governance, and sustainable development, stated the EU delegation. Russian troops hit energy infrastructure in a large-scale overnight attack against Ukraine on March 28. Gas production facilities were damaged, reported Ukraine's state energy company Naftogaz, adding it was the 18th combined attack on Naftogaz group infrastructure since the start of the full-scale war. According to them, no injuries were reported as a result of the shelling. Naftogaz specialists are currently assessing the damage and working to mitigate the consequences of the strike, with restoration already beginning to ensure uninterrupted gas supplies, wrote the company. President Zelensky commented on the so-called energy ceasefire during a press conference following the Coalition of the Willing meeting with other European leaders in Paris on Thursday.
The US say that they consider the Black Sea ceasefire and energy ceasefire as working. 2 days ago, there was a night when there were no strikes in the energy sector, but today, energy infrastructure in the city of Kherson was damaged by Russian artillery. This is how it's working.
Ukraine returned the bodies of 909 soldiers killed in battle, reported the Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War on Friday. The repatriated fallen Ukrainian defenders were recovered from several key areas of the war, including in Kurakhove, Pokrovsk, Bakhmut, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia directions. The International Committee of the Red Cross, alongside key Ukrainian government agencies, were acknowledged for their assistance in facilitating this process.